I want to start by telling you something today. You are not here by accident. You didn't stumble into this room or click on this message by chance. I believe it's a divine appointment. God has something He wants to speak into your life right now. Maybe you've been feeling overwhelmed. Maybe your thoughts have been racing. Your peace has been disturbed. Your joy's been under attack. You lay in bed at night and your mind is running like a treadmill: worry, fear, insecurity, regret. It feels like your thoughts have a life of their own. But I came here to tell you, you are not at the mercy of your mind. You can take control. God has given you the power to rise above negative thinking, to cast down strongholds, and to live with a sound mind. See, your mind is a powerful servant, but a terrible master. If you don't learn to take authority over it, it will take authority over you. But here's the good news: you don't have to live trapped by thoughts that were never meant to define you. You don't have to listen to the lies the enemy whispers. You don't have to accept every anxious thought as your reality. The scripture says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That means it's possible. That means there's hope. That means change can start today, not when everything around you changes, but when something inside of you does. So today we're going to talk about how to train your mind, renew your thoughts, and reclaim your peace. Because if you can learn to control your mind, you'll unlock the life God always intended for you. Your mind is not just a part of you. It's the battleground where your life is won or lost. Before anything changes on the outside, something has to shift on the inside. The thoughts you choose to entertain, the beliefs you allow to grow, the words you replay in your heart, they're all shaping your direction. Every day, countless thoughts pass through your mind. Some lift you up, others tear you down. Some encourage you to believe, to dream, to take a step of faith. Others try to convince you you're not enough, that your best days are behind you, that what you're facing is too big. But here's the truth: you don't have to accept every thought that comes your way. You have the power to choose. You have the power to believe what God says about you, not what fear or failure whispers. Too many people go through life unaware that they're in a battle. They wake up discouraged, not because their life is over, not because their future is gone, but because they've allowed negative thinking to become the default pattern in their minds. The battle isn't in the circumstances, it's in the mind. When you believe the wrong voices, you start living a smaller life than what you were created for. You stop stretching, you stop expecting, you stop hoping. But it's not because the opportunity is gone. It's because your mind has been filled with doubts instead of destiny. That's why the scripture tells us to guard our minds. It says to take every thought captive and make it obedient to the truth. That means not letting thoughts of worry just camp out in your heart, not letting discouragement take over your day, not letting what someone said about you 5 years ago become the soundtrack you keep replaying. You are not a prisoner to those thoughts. You have a choice. You can say, that may be how I used to think, but it's not who I am anymore. I am chosen. I am capable. I am moving forward. When David stood before Goliath, the battle wasn't won with a stone. It was won in the mind long before he ever stepped onto that field. Everyone else was intimidated. Everyone else said he's too big. But David had trained his thoughts. He remembered how God had delivered him from the lion and the bear. He focused on the victories, not the size of the problem. He declared, the same God who helped me then will help me now. That's how you win in life, by learning to speak truth to your mind when fear comes, by standing your ground when doubt tries to move in, by reminding yourself of what God has already brought you through. Your thoughts are seeds, and every seed produces something. If you plant fear, you'll harvest anxiety. If you plant faith, you'll see strength begin to rise. You can't let just anything grow in your mental garden. You have to be intentional. Pull up the weeds of insecurity. Cut off the roots of bitterness. Water the truth, nurture hope, protect your peace. And yes, it takes effort. It takes repeating truth until it becomes louder than the lies. But the fruit is worth it. You start waking up with vision. You handle challenges with calm. You walk into situations with confidence. Not because everything is perfect, but because your mind is aligned with truth, not turmoil. There's a reason why the enemy doesn't attack your finances first, or your health first. He comes after your mind. Because if he can plant a lie there, he knows it will show up in how you live. If he can get you to believe you're not loved, you'll stop loving others. If he can get you to believe your future is bleak, you'll stop preparing for it. But when you know the truth, when you guard your thoughts, when you stand in faith, even when feelings don't match suddenly, you're taking back ground. You're not reacting to life, you're leading it from a place of strength. Even science backs this up. Neuroscience tells us our brains are wired to adapt. It's called neuroplasticity. That means you're not stuck with the way you've always thought. You can literally rewire your thinking patterns over time. That lines up with the Word of God, which says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You want to transform your life? It starts with how you think. You want peace in the middle of chaos? Train your thoughts to anchor on truth. You want to step into a new season? Prepare your mind to receive it before your feet ever get there, because your mind is where the shift begins. What you think about, you bring about. What you magnify in your mind grows in your life. That's why you've got to magnify hope, magnify grace. Magnify the possibilities God has placed inside you. The battle is real, but you're not in it alone. And when you start choosing truth over fear, belief over doubt, faith over failure, you're no longer letting your mind run wild. You're learning to rule over it with strength, with clarity, and with peace. You can't always stop thoughts from coming, but you can decide which ones get to stay. Thoughts are like visitors knocking on the door of your mind. Some are helpful, full of faith, vision, and encouragement. Others come to drain your peace, stir up worry, replay your past, and make you doubt your worth. The key is learning how to manage that door. Just because a thought shows up doesn't mean you have to invite it in and give it coffee and let it settle on your couch. You have the authority to say, this thought doesn't belong here, and show it the way out. We live in a world full of noise. The news is constant, social media is nonstop. And there's pressure to always stay connected. But in the midst of that noise, your thoughts are being shaped quietly, daily, and powerfully. If you're not intentional, the loudest voices become your inner voice. That's why you must be selective. Just like you wouldn't let strangers move into your home, don't let toxic thoughts move into your mind. Filter them. Question them. Don't let them go unchecked just because they feel familiar. Familiar doesn't mean truthful. Comfortable doesn't mean healthy. Some people wonder why they feel anxious, why they can't rest, why they constantly expect the worst. It's not always the circumstances, it's the thoughts they've accepted as truth. If you constantly think, I'll never get ahead, or nothing good ever happens to me, or I'm just not good enough, you're building a life around a lie. Your mind doesn't just reflect your life, it directs your life. And your words often follow your thoughts. That's why the internal dialogue, it matters so much. What are you repeating to yourself when no one's around? What are you agreeing with in your own mind? Think about a garden. You don't get to choose every seed that blows in with the wind, but you do get to choose which ones stay in the soil. If you leave every seed, weeds will take over. It's the same with your thoughts. Doubt will try to blow in. Fear will try to settle. Insecurity will sneak in quietly. But you can say, I'm not giving this thought space to grow. You have to learn to interrupt the pattern. You have to say, that's not who I am anymore, or that doesn't align with my purpose, or this thought is not from God, and I won't let it stay. Too often people get stuck because they don't realize they've built their identity around unhealthy thoughts. Maybe someone told you years ago that you weren't smart enough or talented enough or attractive enough. And now every time you try to step forward, that old voice whispers, why bother? But here's the truth. Just because the thought feels automatic doesn't mean it's accurate. Automatic doesn't mean permanent. That's why renewing your mind is a daily practice. It's not a one-time fix. Every day you wake up and say, I choose to think in alignment with who I truly am, not who fear says I am. You have more power than you think. You can redirect your focus. When negative thoughts show up, don't just entertain them, replace them. Don't just say, I hope this feeling passes. Get active with your thoughts. Speak truth. Declare promises. Say things like, I am equipped for this day. I am strong in the face of challenge. I am worthy of love and grace. These aren't just nice sayings, they're tools for training your mind. You're building new pathways. You're telling your brain what matters. You're setting a new standard for your inner life. This is why quiet time is so important. When you pause to pray, reflect, or meditate on truth, you're giving your mind a chance to reset. You're creating space between the thought and your response. In that space, you find clarity. You find power. You remember that not every voice deserves your attention. You remember that your thoughts are not the boss you are. You get to decide what stays and what goes. That means when worry tries to park in your mind, you can say, there's no room for you today. When comparison sneaks in, you can say, I'm running my race and I'm right where I'm supposed to be. When discouragement whispers, it's never going to change, you can respond, change is already happening in me. What you tolerate in your mind today will shape your future tomorrow. So be bold, be intentional. Be protective of your peace. Learn to treat your thoughts the way you treat your health or your home, with care, with discipline, and with love. You can't stop every thought from arriving, but you can stop them from living rent-free in your heart. That's the power of choice. That's the power of a trained mind. And the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes to welcome thoughts that build you up and send away the ones that tear you down. Renewing your mind daily is not a suggestion, it's a necessity if you want to live with peace, clarity, and purpose. The world we live in is constantly pulling our thoughts in every direction. One moment you're confident, the next moment you're comparing yourself to someone else's highlight reel. One day you feel strong in your faith, the next you're overwhelmed by anxiety about the future. That's why you can't afford to coast mentally. Just like your body needs daily nourishment, your mind needs daily renewal. You have to decide every single day what kind of thoughts you will carry, what kind of perspective you will adopt, and what kind of atmosphere you will allow to take root inside you. This is not about being perfect or positive all the time. It's about being aware, being intentional, recognizing when your thoughts are drifting into places they don't belong and pulling them back into alignment. It's about not letting yesterday's fear define today's choices. It's about not waking up and letting your emotions run the show. Because if you don't renew your mind on purpose, the default setting of life will always pull you toward doubt, worry, comparison, and fear. Those voices don't need an invitation, they show up on their own. But you don't have to listen. You can choose to tune your thoughts to truth instead of turmoil. Think of your mind like a garden. Everyday seeds are being planted, some by what you see, some by what you hear, and many by what you think repeatedly. If you don't tend to that garden, weeds will start to grow. You'll begin believing lies that were never meant to define you. You'll walk around with invisible burdens you were never meant to carry. But when you get up each day and say, I'm going to water the right seed, something begins to shift. You start noticing your thoughts sooner. You catch that inner critic before it gains momentum. You pause long enough to replace a negative spiral with a word of life. That's what renewing your mind really is. It's not about never having a bad thought. It's about recognizing it quickly and shifting your focus intentionally. It's taking a moment in the middle of your busy schedule to say, wait, that thought doesn't serve me. That's not what God says about me. That's not the voice I'm following. You don't have to be carried away by every fear that pops up. You don't have to follow every storyline your mind creates. You are not your thoughts, you are the thinker. You get to direct them. You get to choose which ones will shape your emotions, your beliefs, and your behavior. Daily renewal also means staying connected to the source of truth. For some people, that's reading scripture. For others, it's prayer, journaling, or moments of silence and stillness. It's whatever practice helps you come back to center, to truth, to who you really are beneath the noise. Because when you forget who you are, your mind becomes vulnerable to anything. It starts grabbing onto opinions, fears, labels, and judgments just to feel secure. But when you make space each day to remember your worth, your calling, and your identity, your mind becomes stronger. Your inner world becomes stable, even when the outer world is uncertain. Renewing your mind daily isn't something you outgrow. The most peaceful people you know didn't get there by accident. They trained their minds. They rewired their thoughts. They showed up again and again to do the work no one else could see. And that work pays off not in one giant breakthrough, but in the quiet, daily victories that build strength, resilience, and clarity over time. It's in the choice to replace judgment with grace. The decision to let go of control and trust the process. The practice of speaking truth to yourself even when you don't feel it fully yet. There's power in repetition. What you think repeatedly, you start to believe. What you believe, you begin to live out. That's why it's not enough to hear truth once. You have to hear it again and again until it becomes your default response. That's how you build new mental pathways. That's how you rewrite old stories. That's how you break free from thought patterns that kept you stuck for years. And that's why this is a daily journey, not because you're weak, but because your mind is powerful. And like anything powerful, it needs to be guided, trained, and refreshed continually. You don't have to wake up every day and fight your thoughts alone. You have help, you have tools, and you have the ability to change what's happening inside you. But it starts with a choice, a daily decision to check in, to shift your focus, to speak truth over your life, no matter what the world is saying around you. And as you do that day after day, you begin to see how renewing your mind isn't just something you do, it becomes a way of living that brings peace, direction, and strength into every part of your life. Negative thoughts are not facts, but the problem is that we often treat them like they are. A single doubt can feel like a verdict, a moment of fear can feel like a forecast, and one harsh memory can sound like a permanent truth. But just because a thought enters your mind with conviction doesn't mean it carries truth. It might sound convincing, it might trigger real emotions, but that doesn't mean it's grounded in reality. Your mind can echo voices from the past, painful experiences, or cultural narratives that have nothing to do with who you truly are or what you are capable of. So many people live under the weight of assumptions they never question. They accept thoughts like, I'm not good enough, I'll always struggle, no one truly cares, as if these are carved in stone. These kinds of thoughts are not just destructive, they're deceptive. They sneak in quietly, but they build strongholds. A negative thought repeated long enough can start to feel like an identity. That's why it's so important to stop treating every thought as a fact. You have to pause and examine where that thought is coming from. Who told you that? When did you start believing that? Is it aligned with truth, or is it rooted in fear, shame, or pain? You have to become a gatekeeper of your mind, not a passive observer. Letting every thought in without evaluation is like leaving your front door open to anyone who wants to walk in. Just because a thought feels real doesn't mean it deserves residency. Thoughts can be triggered by fatigue, stress, past trauma, or even what you ate last night. Your emotions might validate those thoughts temporarily, but truth isn't based on temporary feelings. It's based on what aligns with your values, your purpose, and your faith. That's why you have to challenge negative thoughts and speak life into your own mind. When a negative thought says, you failed too many times, you don't just agree with it, you respond with perspective. You remind yourself of what you've learned, how far you've come, and how failure isn't the end, but often the beginning of wisdom. When a thought says, nobody cares, you don't let that grow roots. You look back at the people who've shown up, the relationships you've built, the moments when grace showed up unexpectedly. You train your mind to remember truth, not just rehearse pain. You don't deny the hard things, but you refuse to build your identity on them. Negative thoughts can become mental habits. The more you agree with them, the more they wire into your thinking. You start anticipating the worst before anything even happens. You begin filtering every situation through a lens of fear, suspicion, or defeat. This is why it's not enough to just be positive. You have to replace the negative with something more powerful. That's what breaks the cycle, not ignoring the thought, but confronting it. Not pretending it's not there, but refusing to accept it as the final word. You replace "I can't handle this" with "I've handled hard things before." You replace "I'm not enough" with "I'm growing every day." You replace "this is hopeless" with "this is a challenge, not a conclusion." You wouldn't take directions from someone who's always lost. So why take direction from a thought that's always leading you into fear, shame, or regret? Learn to question those thoughts. Put them on trial. Ask, is this thought helping me grow or keeping me stuck? Is it leading me toward peace or away from it? Is it consistent with who I want to be? If the answer is no, then it doesn't deserve your agreement. You don't have to believe everything you think. In fact, some of the most freeing moments come when you realize that thought is not the truth about me, it's just a voice I'm choosing not to listen to anymore. Taking back control of your mind starts with noticing your thoughts, then actively choosing which ones stay. That doesn't mean you never feel discouraged, it means discouragement doesn't get the final say. It doesn't mean anxiety never knocks, it means you don't let it make decisions for you. It's a process of developing awareness and practicing mental discipline. And it happens one choice at a time. One moment of saying, no, I'm not going to follow that thought down a dark road today. One decision to say I'm going to speak truth over myself, even if I don't feel it yet. One habit of catching yourself when your thoughts begin to spiral and gently redirecting them toward what is constructive, hopeful, and true. When you stop accepting negative thoughts as facts, your entire mental environment starts to change. You begin to take back power from the lies that used to dominate your self-image. You stop living reactively and start leading your thoughts with purpose. You gain clarity, you build resilience, and you become someone who doesn't just survive difficult moments, you grow through them. Because now your thoughts aren't pushing you down, they're working with you to lift you higher. You are not your thoughts. That might sound simple, but it's one of the most powerful truths you can hold onto when your mind feels out of control. Too often people confuse the thoughts they think with the person they are. If a fearful thought arises, they assume they must be a fearful person. If a dark or angry thought shows up, they start to believe they're broken or bad. But thoughts are just mental events, they come and go. Some are helpful, others are harmful. Some are rooted in truth, others in fear, trauma, or insecurity. What matters most is not that the thought appeared, but what you choose to do with it once it does. The mind is always active, always working, always throwing ideas, judgments, and imaginations your way. But you don't have to internalize every one of them. Your identity is not defined by the chaos that sometimes shows up in your mental space. You might experience anxiety, but you are not anxiety. You might battle with doubt, but you are not a doubter by nature. These are passing experiences, not permanent identities. And once you start seeing the difference between the thoughts in your head and the truth of who you are, everything begins to change. Imagine your thoughts like clouds in the sky. Some are light and fluffy, full of hope and peace. Others are dark and heavy, filled with fear or frustration, but you are not the clouds, you are the sky that holds them. They might pass through, but they don't define the sky. That space behind the thoughts is where your real self lives, the you that observes, that chooses, that can step back and say, I see that thought, but I'm not going to let it guide me. That separation is where your power lies. That's where freedom begins. Just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. That's a concept many people never pause to consider. A thought can sound convincing, especially when it aligns with your worst fears or insecurities. But thoughts aren't facts, they're just stories your brain is telling in a given moment. And your brain can be influenced by so many things: fatigue, old memories, unmet needs, cultural messages, or even your blood sugar levels. Learning to question your thoughts doesn't mean ignoring them, it means putting them through a filter. It means being willing to ask, is this really true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Does it reflect who I want to be? When you separate yourself from your thoughts, you stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally. You stop letting a bad moment turn into a bad day just because one negative thought went unchecked. You begin to build a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap you find freedom. You realize you have choices. You can choose to replace, reframe, or release a thought. You can choose to speak truth over yourself when lies try to creep in. You can decide which narrative you will believe about your life, your future, and your worth. This doesn't mean you suppress or ignore difficult thoughts. Sometimes your thoughts are trying to reveal something that needs attention or healing. But even then, they're still not who you are. They're signals, not sentences. A thought that says, "I'll never be good enough," might be a sign that you're dealing with deep wounds, not a reflection of your value. A thought that says, "Everything is falling apart," could be an expression of fear, not a prediction of the future. When you give yourself permission to observe without judgment, you give yourself space to grow, to heal, and to move forward with clarity. Being aware of your thoughts is a form of self-leadership. It's how you take control of your internal life, rather than being tossed around by every emotional wave that shows up. It's how you build emotional strength and spiritual stability. It's how you learn to speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism. Because if you wouldn't say it to a friend, why would you say it to yourself? When you make that shift, your internal world becomes a safer place. You stop living under the constant pressure of self-judgment. You start to build a relationship with yourself based on compassion, curiosity, and truth. There will be days when the negative thoughts feel louder than the truth. Days when the doubts creep in fast and the hope feels quiet. But that doesn't mean you're losing. It means you're in the process. It means your awareness is growing. It means you're catching what you used to miss. That's progress. That's transformation. The goal isn't to never have a negative thought. The goal is to not let it control you. It's to let it pass through without letting it take root. It's to notice it without letting it narrate your day. As you begin to recognize the space between who you are and what you think, you start living with more peace. You start responding instead of reacting. You stop identifying with fear and begin aligning with truth. And when that becomes your daily mindset, your entire life begins to shift, not because your circumstances changed, but because you did. You showed up to your own mind, you took ownership of your thoughts, and you started walking in the truth that your thoughts are not your identity, they are simply visitors. And you decide which ones get to stay. The way you speak to yourself is one of the most powerful forces shaping your mind, your emotions, and your destiny. Every day your inner dialogue is either building you up or tearing you down. It's either encouraging your growth or reinforcing your fears. Many people walk through life with an inner voice that constantly criticizes, belittles, and doubts them. They wouldn't speak that way to a friend, yet they tolerate then themselves. That's why learning to speak life to your mind isn't just a motivational idea, it's a transformational discipline. When you wake up in the morning, your mind is already tuned to a frequency. You can either let it default to fear, insecurity, and chaos, or you can tune it to truth, hope, and clarity. That tuning happens through your words. What you say to yourself in the quiet moments when no one is watching becomes the foundation of how you feel, what you believe, and how you show up in the world. If you keep telling yourself, "I'm not ready, I'll never get it right," or "I always mess things up," your mind will align with those statements. But if you begin your day with, "I am learning, I am strong enough for this, I am not my past," then your mind starts to shift its direction. Your words are not just sounds, they are seeds. They grow into belief systems. They plant identities. They shape the lens through which you see yourself and your life. If you consistently speak words of faith, strength, and love to your mind, you begin to rewire your internal patterns. You begin to undo years of negative conditioning. You begin to take back authority over your own narrative. Because no matter what others have said about you, what matters most is what you say about yourself in the stillness of your own heart. Sometimes people think that speaking positively to yourself means ignoring reality, but that's not the case. It's not about pretending everything is perfect, it's about choosing which truth you will align with. The truth that says this challenge is big, or the truth that says I've been equipped to handle big challenges. Both are true, but only one empowers you. You get to decide what part of the truth you emphasize. You get to decide what narrative you reinforce, and over time that choice becomes your character, your mindset, your reality. There is incredible power in simply pausing throughout your day, speaking a few intentional sentences over your mind. In the middle of stress, I am calm and capable. In the face of fear, I have walked through hard things and I'm still standing. In moments of doubt, I have purpose even when I don't feel it. These words are not magic, but they are medicine. They don't always change your circumstances instantly, but they begin to change how you relate to yourself within those circumstances. And that inner shift is often the key to unlocking the strength, clarity, and direction you've been looking for. One of the greatest transformations happens when you begin to speak to yourself with the same grace you offer to others. That means learning to interrupt the voice that says, I always mess up, and replacing it with, I'm allowed to make mistakes and still be valuable. It means shifting from I'm not enough to I am growing every single day. It's not about shallow affirmations, it's about truthful declarations that reflect your intention to grow, heal, and move forward. Your mind is listening, and your words are the instructions it follows. Most people don't realize how much of their anxiety, indecision, or lack of motivation stems from the way they speak to themselves. A harsh inner dialogue creates tension, fear, and paralysis. But a compassionate, empowering inner voice creates momentum, creativity, and peace. You don't have to wait until you feel confident to start speaking confidently. You can speak life into your mind first, and the feelings will often follow. Words lead the way. Feelings catch up later. That's why the discipline of intentional self-talk is one of the most underrated and life-changing habits you can build. Your mind is always collecting data, always interpreting your reality through the lens you give it. When you feed it words of doubt, your vision becomes narrow and reactive. But when you feed it words of faith and possibility, your vision expands. You begin to notice opportunities instead of obstacles. You become more solution-oriented, more present, more resilient. This isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain begins to form new pathways based on repeated language. What you say becomes what you believe, and what you believe becomes how you live. This is why it's so important to not just hope for a better mindset, but to speak it into being. Even when you don't feel strong, speak strength. Even when you feel overwhelmed, speak order. Even when you feel stuck, speak movement. You're not lying to yourself, you're leading yourself. You're declaring the direction you're choosing to walk in, not denying the reality of where you currently stand. And that kind of leadership, the kind that starts in your own thoughts and words, is what begins to shift everything from the inside out.